Welcome to Lawyer Business Advantage. This podcast is dedicated to helping attorneys earn more money, get better clients, and spend more time with family. I'm your host, Alay and founder of Law Firm Success Group. Smart business guidance for small law firms begins in 3, 2, 1. And it is my pleasure to welcome back to Lawyer Business Advantage, Belle Walker with Bellevue Consulting. Belle, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
This will be fun. The last one was fantastic also, where we talked about law firm invoicing. So attorney entrepreneurs, if you didn't catch that, be sure you do. And Belle actually shared a process map with us during that, which you can catch on the YouTube channel. So today we're going to be talking about another aspect of law firms that gives law firm owners fits, and that is onboarding staff. Oh my gosh. The only thing worse than having to terminate, well, I should change that. The only thing worse than onboarding new staff is having to terminate somebody. It's just terrible. And unfortunately, if onboarding isn't done right, that's oftentimes the logical next step is the person either quits and leaves, or you as the owner have to let them go. And we want to avoid those outcomes. And one of those things is to really make onboarding as easy as possible, yes, but also as high quality as possible, so that they're getting all of the information and that they are able to be profitable and efficient as quickly as possible. So, Belle, how does this all tie into process mapping? Oh my gosh.
Well, I building on what you were saying, certainly those are the downside consequences if you don't onboard your staff, effectively and quickly. There's also potential risk of degradation of the client experience if your staff is unclear, unsure, or confused. But this all has to do with process mapping, because the clearer you can be in providing training and reference materials to your staff, the better the chances that you're going to end up in a virtuous cycle of staff that are quickly able to feel comfortable, competent, deliver that high level of client service, and then are inclined to stick around because everybody's happy with what they're doing.
Right. By the way, most of the, well, not most, a lot of clients I've worked with have said that they have this dream of having a manual for all of their employees, that when their employees come on board, they have it all written out and it all works really, really well. I only really know of 2 clients that have done a great job of doing this. And so shout outs to Ann and Tim, if you're listening, bang up job, both of you. But this is not easy to do. And you actually have a situation where you took a client kind of through this process mapping and improved their onboarding. So kind of set the scene for us and tell us another story about this situation with this law firm.
So this was a law firm that does a whole bunch of different work in the estate planning space. And so they do have traditional estate planning offerings. They also have some advising that they do around various medical plans. And they also are able to act as I believe, I don't want to say fiduciary. I think there's a they're also able to act on behalf of the client estates. And so with all these different options,
Yeah, I think the executor of the trust, probably.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay. Yeah.
And so they had all these different options, and for any one of those paths, the documentation was still not inexistent, but would have matched more kind of that idea of a manual. But what they were finding was that as they had new staff coming in, they were having a hard time training the staff on all of the decision points that needed to be addressed to filter prospects into the right screening conversations, into the right contracts, into the right just guidance and expectations. And that's where I think process maps really shine. So I'm going to pause for a minute and just talk about types of documentation quickly,
Sure.
which I know is totally the sexiest topic that has ever been on this podcast. But bear with me. So on kind of the simplest end, you have checklists. this is just a list of things. Do step one, do step two, do step three. Not a ton of detail. It's enough to simply say, enter the client in Clio. Done. Um, that will work for experienced staff. That works when it is always the same steps. I am a pilot. I am a huge fan of checklists. They are highly valuable. They are not always the right documentation for something as complex as a law firm. And kind of on the other end of the detail spectrum is what I often think of as a traditional manual. And that tends to be where you have a lot of your screenshots and detail and really, really step by step. When you say enter the new client or the prospect information into Clio, what the heck does that mean? Where do you click? How do you create this? And the good news is that in the last several months, even there's been great tools that have come onto the market, some of them free, for leveraging AI to create this kind of material. I'm a big fan of Scribd, SCRIBD, as a way to capture the screenshots and build out those descriptions. Again, that is really, really helpful if you always do step one, step two, step three, or you know when to do step one, step two, or step three. So a process map can literally be a map to help your staff navigate the different tasks and steps and activities that are needed to onboard a new client, to screen, to make sure there's a fit, and to make sure that all of their information is tracked.
Okay, so help me understand or clarify for me, please. What's the difference between a process map and a checklist?
A checklist is not very visual. It's the most visual you're going to get is literally the check boxes on a
Yeah,
checklist.
like it's like a little written down, but a process map is visual.
Is very visual. And we had that great example in last week's episode. If folks want to check that out, in particular, you're going to have at least 3 different key visual shapes in a process map. Something that tells you this is a start point or an end point, something that tells you this is a step, a task, an activity, something needs to be done, and then decision points. These are often ovals for start and end, boxes for tasks, and diamonds for decision points. And the decision points are literally yes, no questions. So you hit a decision point, you answer yes or no, and then you follow the arrow to figure out what you do next.
And that really is, I think, one of the really powerful differentiators with it is it branches. So it has a decision point, whereas a checklist is just kind of static. And if you try and branch anything in a checklist, it gets out of control really fast. But a process map can really accommodate that and accommodate it pretty well. Assuming you can lay it all out on a couple of pages, but that's a different conversation.
Yes.
um, but law firms aren't really used to process maps. They're used to checklists. They get that and they use them really well. But process maps are kind of a different deal. So tell us a little bit about how this, what this firm was trying to achieve when they met with you.
Yeah, so they had realized they had had some longtime staff members who had been with the organization for many years. And when they left, there was documentation, but it wasn't as complete as the partners realized they needed when somebody entirely new was coming into the process. So what they were looking for was a way to bridge that gap between understanding what needed to be done and then the documentation that existed on how to do it. So for example, I'll pick on that enter prospect information into Clio step. There was pretty good documentation around which fields were needed to be captured, what information needed to be there. That was pretty much a checklist that the law firm had. But knowing whether this was a prospect that should be entered into Clio was a giant question mark that had been handled purely based on expertise, but did have very specific questions that could be asked to decide whether or not to actually enter that prospect.
Got it. So they were trying to reduce kind of the amount of churn within their organization, the amount of probably frustration that new employees were having, as well as existing employees. Like, oh my God, I got to go train this person. And then, every time there's a new person, they got to go through the whole training exercise again.
Exactly.
Did they
Yeah.
have any kind of a quantitative, like a numerical goal of, hey, we want to take our onboarding process from X to Y or anything like that?
So this wasn't a very large firm. It was more, dang it, we'd really like to hang on to a new staff member for more than 6 months.
Yeah,
Because
that's a big
that
deal.
something I forgot, and that they had the long tenured staff member, and when that person left, they went through 3 or 4 people in the next year, in that role, and
Yeah.
it was just a lot of frustration. And
Oh yeah.
I don't think this is a new story for many of your listeners.
No, and it really strikes a chord with me because when you have that person, that key person that's been there for a long time and leaves, they take a whole raft of experience and knowledge with them. And unfortunately, when the firm hires a replacement, more often than not, um, when a replacement comes in, the firm is expecting them to do everything that that person did before from day one. And of course, then that new person is set up for failure, especially if none of this stuff is written down. And it ends up being you know, being here for a month or a couple of weeks and it's not working out. So they're going to quit or be asked to move on and bring in somebody else. And that'll continue until they find someone really capable who can step in. But
Yeah,
maybe that can be helped with a process map.
right. And I think the kicker here is when the long tenured employee left, it was on good terms. Right. This was not a storm out of the office, leave everything in disarray, the next person can be fully expected to deal with the mess. This was a good faith effort was made to document all the work that was being done. And so this is part of why it took them over a year to realize that they needed this support, was because they had documentation, they had checklists, they had step-by-step guides. What was missing was exactly that knowledge and context and expertise around when to use all of that beautiful documentation, for
Got it.
any given prospect.
So that was sort of your aha, and you probably figured that out pretty quickly because you're an expert in this stuff. And then what was your methodology in working with them?
So the methodology in working with them was to sit down with uh, both the lawyers, to get an understanding of where they wanted to see information and when, under what circumstances, and with the staff members there was a mix of folks in the organization. Some had been around for slightly longer, some were new. It was actually great timing when I was working with them, because I was able to create drafts right as a new person was coming in, and so we were able to have that person work with the materials as they're onboarding, and iterate from that fresh perspective. So it was really a process of interviews, capturing those interviews in the visual process map format, and then testing it in an actual training situation, with a fair amount of feedback at that visualization stage.
Very cool. That sounds awesome. And the fact that you're able to really kind of do it live and try it out live and iterate on a live situation is so cool. Um, one of the, concerns I always have whenever I'm doing a project like this, and maybe some of our attorney entrepreneurs do too, is attorney's time is precious, staff's time is precious. And so when they think about, oh my gosh, I'm bringing a consultant who's going to want to interview me and then interview my whole team, and in the back of their mind, they're thinking, but the meter's running, like this is all time that we're just kind of draining out of the firm. I think you have a little bit of a different approach there. So tell us about how you were able to work with the firm to kind of minimize the amount of time they were spending with you and how that worked out.
Yeah, and that's part of why I do that interview based approach. I've found that actually getting potentially vaguer verbal answers, allows me to speed through these conversations relatively quickly, and then separate from those conversations, I can play around with creating the visualizations, looking for the discrepancies, looking. So there are a couple different ways you can do this. I have done sort of the group workshops where everyone puts sticky notes up on the walls and you debate, and that can also work very, very well. What I have found is that the total time actually is often lower, especially for small teams, if you do the individual interviews, because in the group setting, you have a tendency for someone to go in a direction and kind of pull everyone else along. Whereas when you talk to people separately, person A is probably going to miss something, but person B will miss something totally different. And so I'm able to fill in a lot more gaps a lot more quickly, actually, by talking to people individually than having a group conversation, even though that may seem counterintuitive.
It makes a lot of sense because for them, it saves them a lot of time. Takes up more of your time, but
Yes.
they don't have to engage in those group conversations and discussions and all of that. They just kind of answer your questions and then let you figure it out and come back to them with, a draft process map, I assume, and they'll look at it and say, "Oh yeah, that looks great," or "This is surprising," or that kind of thing.
Exactly. And just getting way down into the weeds, but there's a remarkably annoying amount of time in process mapping that just comes down to layout and figuring out how you can arrange the boxes so that the arrows make sense, so that are you more space like if it needs to print out on on whatever size sheet of paper, you're going to approach that layout very differently than if you have a PDF and you can zoom all you want and scroll all you want. My clients don't need to be part of that. They don't need to
Right.
be sitting there while I figure out what goes above or below to make the arrows coherent and flow it all out. I can do that on my own time.
Yes, exactly. I wasn't kidding when I said assuming you can get it to fit on 1 or 2 pages. That really is definitely a challenge. And it could spend so much time doing that. But for this firm in particular, so you went through, you created the process maps. What were some of the aha moments that they really got from this exercise?
Yeah, so I think their biggest aha moment was how important it was in their training to really make clear all of the service offerings up front to the new staff members. Because what they had been finding was, as often happens when it's an organic training approach, they would lay out probably the top three items that they were offering, and the new staff would feel pretty confident about that. But then a prospect would call asking about something else, and the new staff member would tell them, "Oh, we don't do that," only to find out, "Oh, yes, we do," and that would cause all sorts of tension and pain. And really giving those screening questions up front to know, is somebody who is calling our office a fit? Not a complicated piece of the training, but and to be clear, they were listing out all of the things that they did in the initial onboarding, but after the first probably hour or two, they only would talk about two or three. And so then really having that documentation where every time as someone called, the new hire was able to kind of look through the questions and ask all of the questions. They were having a much smoother experience with their new staff much faster.
And was that change made in the process map, or was that made in the checklist, or both, or something else?
The change was really manifested in the process map, because we were able to sort the questions to say 60% of the people who call want service A. Are you calling because you want service A? Great. Follow the rest of these steps.
Ah, okay.
Triage, right? What is then the next most popular, then the next most popular. And so by really ordering in that process map how to approach those questions, they could filter down the most efficient path, or the most likely efficient path, and also listen for keywords that they may not have known to listen for otherwise.
That makes a ton of sense. And what were, what was the impact of this exercise in the firm overall?
Well, I believe that the new hire that I worked with is still there, which is
That's great.
very exciting. And it really helped them to think through and reflect on what are their top service offerings, where is most of their business going, where is it coming from, and how do they want to prioritize any further efforts at efficiency and training to make sure that most of their clients are having the best experience.
Awesome. And then reducing employee frustration doesn't hurt either. So
Heck yes.
very, very cool. So what advice would you give to a law firm owner who's thinking about, okay, well, I'm not really I don't have a plan right now for onboarding my staff. How do I get started with this?
I think that probably the best place to get started is to think through where the expertise comes in for your staff. It's really easy for a law firm owner and a lawyer to know where expertise comes in to the legal work. That's what they've spent their whole careers building. But taking a step back and really thinking, when is it important for context to drive the interactions my staff is having with our clients, and making sure that that information is being captured, whether it's in a process map or somewhere else. Knowing how to do fairly low hanging fruit, knowing when to do and why to do is often the trickiest part. So reflecting on those questions, I think, can be a really powerful way to stave off a lot of that frustration.
Very, very, that's going to take some thinking. So that's good. That's good. And maybe a question that I think some of my clients might have for you is, what do you think can be done with Loom? So Loom, I think, is a free video screenshot capture tool, and the way a lot of attorneys use it and staff uses it is they're doing something and they want to train on it, so they just kind of do a screen capture and comment and then share the video. What are your thoughts on how you can use that to address some of these issues?
So Loom is a great tool for how do I do the thing. It can be a helpful tool for the why and the when. But I would say you need to be really intentional going into any particular video or training that you're making about what questions you're answering, right? Is the person who is watching this video clear? They definitely need to get that prospect information into Clio. So all we're going to do is go into Clio and get all of that information listed out. Or is the person who's watching this video trying to figure out whether this is a prospect that we need to be capturing in great detail or not? And both those things could be answered in one video, but knowing what exactly you're trying to do with the video before you create it, and then also when you tell people how and when to access it, will make a big difference in how effective those videos then are.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like the process map is the context and the why and the when. And then you have the video, which kind of teaches you how to do it. So that's prospective. You don't know how to do it now. The video is going to teach you how to do it. And then if you want to refer back to it to learn how to do it, you can. And then from a quality management perspective, the checklist actually then becomes a proof that you did it.
Right.
So it's not the same as a video. And a lot of people have said, oh yeah, checklist, Loom, same thing. No, actually the Loom is teaching, the checklist is proving that you did it because you check it off.
You can almost flow right through, right? Process map is when to do it, Loom is how to do it, checklist is proof you did it.
Exactly. Exactly. Awesome. Belle, tell us a little bit about what excites you about Bellevue Consulting going forward.
Ooh, I am super excited to be figuring out more of these pitfalls. I'm using this one client as a story and an illustration, but they are representative of quite a few clients that I've worked with. And so one of the things I really enjoy about Bellevue is as more experiences come in, I can see these consistent themes and share stories like this that will hopefully save people like your listeners some of the pain, because we can find those most common pain points and give some hints up front about how to tackle them.
Yeah, to that point, next week we're going to have you back and we're going to talk about best practices for onboarding clients, not staff. So that's going to be a really interesting talk as well. I'm looking forward to hearing your experience there. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Two best ways are LinkedIn or through my website. On LinkedIn, I'm Belle K. Walker. There's an E on the end of Belle, and my website is Bellevue Consulting, BELLEVIEW, like my view, my perspective, consulting.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Belle. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Lawyer Business Advantage podcast. One thing that would really help both us and other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you tune in to listen. And I want to hear from you, so connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you think of this episode. And if you are a solo or an owner of a small law firm and you're looking to earn more money, attract better clients, or reduce your stress, we would love to talk with you to see how we can help. Request your free law firm assessment by visiting lawfirmsuccessgroup.com. Again, that URL is lawfirmsuccessgroup.com. We look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you for listening. My name is Alay and Until next time, remember, you can seize freedom, you can embrace happiness, you can build your perfect practice.